So there are a lot of factors that go into building out a really effective sales process. But before we get into that, it bears mentioning that if you're an early stage company or product that's going to the marketplace and you're lucky enough to have multiple sales channels, it's really important to test and understand which of the channels is most effective for your particular product or service. And what I mean by that is different channels might require different sales processes. So if you try to tackle all of that at one time, it can get pretty complex really quickly and can ultimately impede your sales progress. So what I recommend is eating it kind of like an elephant, one bite at a time. Identify the channel that you feel is probably going to be the best performing for your particular product or service, and build out your sales process for that particular channel, and then iterate on it, measure it, test it, and improve, as you go. And what you might find is that particular sales channel, the incremental gains are so great that you just want to focus on that one particular channel until you have really optimized that channel. And then you can move on to a secondary channel or a tertiary channel and build out the sales processes for those. So that being said, and just one other thing, if the first sales channel that you choose to optimize is one that's not necessarily customer facing, it's not an outbound sales channel, you will need to find a way to make sure that you're getting a good feedback loop from your customers, because there's no substitute for having outbound sales efforts, getting you the information from the street and being able to feed it back into your product or service so that you can find out what the challenges are going to be and get ahead of those. But back to building a great sales process. My personal belief is that a great sales process needs to be engineered. And what I mean by that is, especially in early phases when you're taking a product to the marketplace, it's important that every single word, the sales collateral that you use, and the order in which you deliver all of that information is very purposeful. And by the way, sales collateral is a fancy term for the presentation materials, the visual aids, any kind of data that your salespeople are going to be disseminating to your potential target that's going to tell your story, right? So I find that all of that needs to be very purposeful and laid out in a very structured way in order to be able to tell your story, for a couple of reasons. Because it's important to be testing and measuring and iterating along the way. And without a very defined sales process, there are too many variables at play. And nobody wants to leave their product or service to a sales team that's really winging it. And the reverse of that is also true. You don't want to find out later on that all the early success that you had in sales and the great sales results you got were based upon the awesome charisma of one or two great salespeople. And now it's not repeatable, it's not predictable, and you can't replicate it going forward. So that being said, I find that when you use a systematic sales process, you can continue to iterate on individual pieces of it and eventually get it to where it's as close to perfection as it can be. Now, I've had executives who disagree with me and say that I don't want you giving your salespeople a very specific process. It sounds to me like too old school sales, or I don't want to find out that they're manipulating our prospects into signing contracts. And likewise, I've had sales candidates say to me, I don't follow a specific sales process. I prefer to be consultative in my approach, for lack of a better term. To both of those things, I say, following an engineered sales process and being consultative and considerate in your sales process, those two behaviors are not mutually exclusive. And in my experience, following a very defined process where you're going from A to B to C to D and actually leading your customer through a decision tree and a flow chart and facilitating them making these very easy decisions along the way is the most predictable way to pretty much ensure you're going to come out with a desirable outcome. And ultimately, at the end of the day, then you can break down that process when things aren't working or there are certain steps of the process that are not yielding the results that you'd like, whether it's the number of contacts that you've made that are not resulting in appointments, or it's the number of appointments that you've had that aren't resulting in customers being interested and ultimately in closed sales. You can dissect individual pieces of the process and iterate on that and just change that without like having to overwhelm your sales team by expecting them to just be able to, figure it out and get better, right? And I will tell you that I've been doing this for 2 decades, and the very best salespeople I have ever worked with, the most polished, the most professional, the most consultative, the most trusted, the ones who get the most referrals and have penetrate their accounts most deeply and develop long-term relationships, without exception, almost all of them will tell you that they follow a very defined step-by-step process. Even if the potential target and the customer doesn't realize it's a process that they're being led through, it's pretty defined and replicable, on every single appointment. So that's the craft of building a great sales process is an interesting one, and it takes a lot of dedication. It takes a lot of work on the front end so that ultimately you can reap the rewards on the back end.